Married life complicated. Her sister had eyes only for me. The unexpected guest. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains of the Thorne household, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floors. Evan stood in the kitchen, carefully measuring coffee grounds for the morning routine he and Nina had perfected over 5 years of marriage. Everything in their life had a rhythm, a comfortable predictability that made him feel secure and content. "She's arriving today," Nina called from upstairs, her voice carrying the excitement Evan had heard all week. Her younger sister Lily was coming to stay with them, supposedly for 2 weeks, while she figured out her next move after leaving her apartment in the city. Evan smiled to himself, though he felt a small nod of apprehension. He'd only met Lily twice before, once at their wedding and once at a family gathering. Both times she'd been a whirlwind of energy, laughter, and artistic passion that seemed to fill whatever room she entered. Nina adored her sister, despite their very different approaches to life. The doorbell rang just as Nina descended the stairs, practically bouncing with anticipation. Evan followed her to the door, prepared to greet their guest with appropriate warmth. Nothing could have prepared him for the moment Lily stepped inside. She stood framed in the doorway, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders, wearing a flowing dress that caught the breeze. But it was her eyes that struck him. Deep and expressive, they seemed to look right through his polite greeting to something underneath. When she hugged him, her embrace lasted a fraction too long, her hands warm against his back. "Evan, it's been too long," she said, her voice lower and more intimate than he remembered. "Thank you for letting me crash here. I promise to be the perfect house guest." The first few days passed in a blur of adjustment. Lily transformed their quiet home with her presence. Her paintings appeared on their walls, her music played through the speakers, her laughter echoed through rooms that had been peaceful before. Evan found himself hyper-aware of her movements, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the graceful way she moved through their space. One evening, as Nina worked late at the research lab, Evan found himself alone with Lily in the living room. She was sketching in her journal, curled up on the couch with her feet tucked beneath her. The lamplight made her skin glow with warmth. "Do you ever feel trapped?" she asked suddenly, not looking up from her drawing. The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "By routine? By expectations?" She glanced up then, and her gaze held his. "By the life you've built, even when you love it." Evan shifted uncomfortably. "I suppose everyone feels that way sometimes. But you never act on it." It wasn't a question. She set down her journal and moved closer, sitting beside him on the couch. Her hand brushed against his arm, seemingly by accident. "Maybe it's a compliment," Lily replied, and her hand brushed against his arm, seemingly by accident. "Or maybe it's just an observation. I think there's fire underneath all that control, Evan. I can see it." He should have moved away. He should have changed the subject. Instead, he sat there, feeling the warmth of her proximity, breathing in the subtle scent of her perfume. When he finally stood, making an excuse about needing to prepare for the next day, he caught the small smile that played at the corners of her mouth. That night, lying beside his sleeping wife, Evan stared at the ceiling and knew something had shifted. Lily had been in their home for less than a week, and already she'd awakened something in him he'd forgotten existed. A restlessness, a hunger for spontaneity, a dangerous curiosity about paths not taken. He reached for Nina's hand, seeking comfort in the familiar, but his mind kept returning to those knowing eyes, that intimate voice, and the unspoken invitation that hung in the air between them. The second week of Lily's stay brought a shift in the household's atmosphere, subtle but undeniable. Evan found himself waking earlier, taking extra care with his appearance, telling himself it had nothing to do with who might be in the kitchen when he came downstairs. But Lily was always there, barefoot in one of her oversized shirts, making tea and greeting him with a smile that felt like a secret between them. Nina's research project had entered a critical phase, requiring late nights at the lab and early morning conference calls. She apologized constantly, grateful that Lily was there to keep Evan company. The irony wasn't lost on him. "You don't have to entertain me. Lily said one evening as they found themselves alone again, Nina having texted that she'd be home after midnight. "I'm sure you have work to do, plans with friends." "I don't mind," Evan replied, and realized he meant it. Her company had become something he looked forward to, even as guilt gnawed at him. "Besides, what kind of host would I be?" She laughed, a warm sound that filled the room. "The kind who's afraid of what might happen if he relaxes around me." Her directness always disarmed him. "I'm not afraid. Prove it." She gestured to the piano in the corner, an instrument Nina had insisted they buy, but that sat mostly unused. "Play something for me. Nina mentioned you used to play." "That was years ago." "Then let me hear what years of silence sound like." He sat at the piano, his fingers finding the keys hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. The melody that emerged was melancholy and yearning, something he didn't consciously choose, but that seemed to flow from some buried part of himself. When he finished, the silence felt heavy with meaning. Lily moved behind him, and he felt her hands on his shoulders, gentle but firm. "You're so tense," she murmured, her fingers beginning to knead the knots in his muscles. "You carry everything so tight inside." He should have stopped her. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to stand up, to put distance between them. But her touch felt like relief, like someone finally seeing the weight he carried. Her hands moved along his shoulders, down his spine, and he let his eyes close, let himself feel cared for in a way that Nina, in her distraction and exhaustion, hadn't managed in months. "Lily," he said softly, but didn't finish the sentence, didn't say stop, didn't say this is wrong. Just her name, hanging in the air between permission and prohibition. "I know," she whispered, and her hands stilled. "I know you love her. I know you're faithful. I'm not trying to ruin anything, Evan. I see you, really see you, and I think you need someone to." The moment stretched, fragile and dangerous. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the intimacy. Nina texting that she was on her way home after all, that her colleague had covered for her so she could leave early. Lily stepped back immediately, and when Evan turned to look at her, her expression was complicated. Regret mixed with something that looked like understanding. They didn't speak about what had almost happened, but both knew they'd approached a threshold neither could pretend didn't exist. The next afternoon brought rain, heavy and persistent. Nina had left for the lab before dawn, kissing Evan's forehead and whispering an apology. He'd spent the morning trying to focus on architectural drawings, but his mind kept wandering to the woman sleeping in their guest room. When Lily emerged around noon, she looked different, vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. "Bad dreams?" he asked gently. "Bad memories. Sometimes they feel the same." "Want to talk about it?" For the next hour, Lily opened up in ways that made his heart ache. She spoke about always being compared to Nina, the perfect older sister, about relationships that had failed because she'd tried too hard to be someone she wasn't, about the loneliness of being surrounded by people but feeling truly seen by no one. "Until now," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. "You listen like you actually care about the answer." "I do care," Evan admitted, and realized how true it was. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, Lily had become more than just his wife's sister. She'd become someone whose happiness mattered to him in ways that terrified him. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows. Lily stood and moved to where he sat, perching on the edge of his desk. "Can I tell you something terrible?" His throat felt tight. "Yes. I didn't come here just to visit Nina." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I came because I couldn't stop thinking about you. Ever since the wedding, since I watched the way you looked at her with such devotion, I wanted someone to look at me that way. I wanted you to look at me that way." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Evan's hands trembled as he set down his pen. "Lily, I know it's wrong," she continued, words tumbling out now. "I know you're married to my sister. I know I should leave. But every day I stay, I feel more connected to you,
and I can't figure out if that makes me terrible or just human." He stood, and they were inches apart now, her breath warm on his face. The rain created a cocoon around them, the rest of the world distant and unreal. His hand reached up, almost of its own accord, and touched her cheek. She leaned into it, her eyes closing. "We can't," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I know." Her hand covered his. "But what if we already have? What if this, whatever this is, already crossed every line that matters?" The sound of a car door slamming jolted them apart. Nina's voice called from the front door, something about forgetting her laptop. They separated instantly, Lily moving to the window, while Evan busied himself with papers that suddenly needed organizing. But when Nina appeared in the doorway, slightly breathless and smiling at them both, Evan saw something flicker in her eyes. A question, a concern, perhaps the first real acknowledgement that something in her home had shifted.
The awakening. Nina stood in the doorway of Evan's study, her laptop bag at hand, watching her husband and sister with an expression that made Evan's stomach drop. The moment felt suspended, all three of them aware that something unspoken hung in the air. "Did I interrupt something?" Nina asked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "Just keeping your sister company," Evan said, hating how guilty he sounded despite nothing physical having happened. "We were talking about art," Lily added quickly. "Evan was giving me feedback on some sketches." Nina's gaze moved between them, and Evan could almost see her mind working, cataloging small details, the distance they'd put between themselves too quickly, the flush on Lily's cheeks, his own nervous energy. But she simply nodded, grabbed her laptop, and left with a quick kiss on Evan's cheek that felt more like a test than affection. That night, Nina came home at a reasonable hour for the first time in weeks. She found Evan on the back porch staring at the stars and sat beside him without a word. They remained in silence for several minutes before she spoke. "Do you remember our first anniversary?" "Of course. We drove to the coast, stayed in that little cabin." "You told me that day that you'd never felt more certain about anything than choosing me." She turned to look at him. "Do you still feel that way?" The question pierced through all his confusion and guilt. "Nina, I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking because I've been so wrapped up in my work that I haven't been present, and now Lily's here, and she's so vibrant and available, and I can see how you light up around her in ways you haven't around me in months." Evan felt tears prick his eyes. "I love you. That hasn't changed." "But something has changed." She took his hand. "I can feel it. Maybe I've been feeling it longer than I wanted to admit. We've become roommates who occasionally remember to be married." The truth of her words settled over them. Their comfortable routine had slowly eroded the passion and connection that once defined them. They'd stopped surprising each other, stopped really talking, stopped prioritizing their relationship over everything else demanding their attention. "I don't know what to do with what I'm feeling," Evan admitted, his voice breaking. "I haven't done anything, Nina, I swear I haven't, but the thoughts, the attraction, I feel like I'm betraying you even by admitting they exist." Nina was quiet for a long moment. "I know you haven't acted on it, but emotional intimacy can hurt just as much as physical betrayal, maybe more, because it means something was missing between us that you found with someone else. What she sees in me, or what she reflects back, it's not real. It's the novelty, the forbidden nature of it. It's not built on 5 years of real life together." "But it feels real," Nina said. "That's what makes it dangerous." They sat together as the night deepened, finally having the honest conversation they'd been avoiding for months. Nina admitted her own resentments, feeling taken for granted, missing the spontaneity they'd once shared, wondering if Evan still desired her or just appreciated her reliability. Evan confessed his feelings of invisibility, of going through the motions, of wondering if this was all marriage would ever be. "I don't want to lose you," Nina said finally. "But I also don't want to hold you in a marriage that feels like a prison. We need to decide if we're going to fight for this or let it go." "I want to fight," Evan said immediately. "I want us. Not the comfortable version we've become, but the real, messy, passionate us." Nina nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Then we need to talk to Lily. All of us. Because whatever's happening, it involves her too, and we can't move forward until we acknowledge that." Inside, Lily sat in the guest room, her ear pressed against the door, hearing the muffled voices from the porch. She knew this moment would come, had perhaps even pushed for it in her own twisted way. The guilt that washed over her was profound and overdue. She thought about the patterns in her life, always wanting what others had, always testing boundaries, always seeking validation in ways that hurt people. Her therapist had warned her about this self-destructive tendency, but she'd convinced herself this time was different, that what she felt for Evan was genuine. But sitting in the darkness of the guest room, surrounded by the life her sister had built, Lily finally saw herself clearly. She wasn't in love with Evan. She was in love with the idea of being loved so completely, so devotedly. She wanted to be Nina, stable, chosen, secure. And in trying to take what Nina had, she'd nearly destroyed it. The next morning, the three of them sat around the kitchen table, coffee growing cold in their cups. The conversation that followed was excruciating and necessary. Lily spoke first, her voice shaking but honest, admitting her attraction to Evan and her deeper issues with seeking validation through inappropriate connections. Nina listened, her face a mixture of hurt and compassion. Evan took full responsibility for entertaining the emotional affair, for not setting clearer boundaries, for allowing his dissatisfaction with his marriage to make him vulnerable to someone else's attention. "I'm not blameless in this," Nina said when they'd all spoken. "I created distance between us, Evan. I stopped making you a priority. That doesn't excuse what happened, but it's part of the truth." "And I took advantage of that distance," Lily said, tears streaming down her face. "I saw a crack and wedged myself into it. I'm so sorry, Nina. You deserved better from your sister." The pain in the room was palpable, but so was something else. A strange relief that came from finally naming what had been festering in silence. They'd brought the shadow into light, and though it hurt, it also offered the possibility of healing. "What happens now?" Evan asked, looking between the two women who had become the center of his complicated emotional world. Nina reached across the table and took both their hands. "Now we figure out how to move forward, together or apart, but with honesty this time. No more pretending everything is fine when it isn't." Confrontation and truth. The days following their conversation were strange and fragile, like walking on glass. Lily kept to the guest room most of the time, giving Evan and Nina space to begin the difficult work of examining their marriage. But avoidance wasn't healing, and they all knew another conversation was necessary, one that went deeper than apologies and acknowledgments. It was Nina who initiated it, suggesting they sit down together one evening when emotions had settled enough to allow for clarity. They gathered in the living room, the same space where so much unspoken tension had built up over the past weeks. This time, the air felt different, heavy with truth rather than secrets. "I need to understand something," Nina began, looking at her sister. "When did this start for you? Was it really since the wedding? Or is there something else I'm missing?" Lily drew her knees up to her chest, making herself small. "It started before that, if I'm being completely honest. When you first told me about Evan, how you'd met, how he made you feel, I was jealous. Not of him specifically, but of what you had. I was between relationships, feeling lost, and you had this perfect life falling into place." "My life isn't perfect," Nina said softly. "I don't think any life is. I know that now. But at the wedding, watching you two together," Lily's voice cracked, "I wanted what you had so badly that I convinced myself I wanted him. And then when I came here, and he was kind to me, actually listened to me, I let myself believe it meant something it didn't." Evan leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "I need to own my part in this. Lily, I was flattered by your attention. My ego needed it because I'd been feeling invisible in my own marriage. I let conversations go places they shouldn't have. I enjoyed the way you looked at me. That was a choice I made, every single time. But you never touched me. You never crossed that final line, Lily said. The line was crossed long before any physical contact would have happened, Nina interjected. When you started confiding in each other instead of in me, when you started looking forward to time alone together, when you started comparing what you had with each other to what you had with me. The truth of Nina's words settled over them. Evan felt the full weight of his emotional betrayal in a way he hadn't before. It wasn't about what he'd done. It was about what he'd allowed to grow in the spaces where Nina should have been. I have my own confession, Nina continued, and both Evan and Lily looked at her in surprise. I knew something was happening between you two earlier than I let on. I saw the way you looked at each other, the energy that changed when you were in the same room, and part of me didn't want to confront it because then I'd have to confront how unhappy I had become. Nina, Evan started, but she held up her hand. Let me finish. I threw myself into work because it was easier than facing the fact that our marriage had become routine and passionless. I convinced myself that stability was enough, that comfort was the same as love. And when Lily came and brought all this intensity and chaos, part of me was almost relieved because it forced everything into the open. Lily wiped tears from her cheeks. I've done this before, you know. Not exactly this, but versions of it. I get involved with unavailable men, or I fixate on relationships I can't have because deep down I don't think I deserve real love. If someone is already taken, if the relationship is impossible, then I can't be disappointed when it doesn't work out. That sounds lonely, Evan said gently. It is. It's incredibly lonely. Lily looked at her sister. And watching you have everything I wanted, a stable relationship, a partner who adores you, a life that makes sense, it made me feel even more broken. So instead of working on myself, I tried to prove I could have what you have, even if it meant taking it from you. But you can't take it from me, Nina said, her voice firm but not unkind. What Evan and I have, or had, isn't something that can be stolen. It can only be given away. And neither of us gave it away. We let it deteriorate on its own, and you stepped into the space that created. But that doesn't mean what happened wasn't hurtful or wrong. Evan reached for Nina's hand, and she let him take it. I want to rebuild what we had. I want to remember why I fell in love with you, why I chose you, why you're the person I want to wake up next to every morning. But I don't know if you still want that. Nina's eyes filled with tears. I do want that. I'm angry and hurt, but I still love you. I still choose you. But we can't go back to the way things were. We need something new. Something honest. I should leave, Lily said quietly. I need to leave. Not just this house, but I need to get my life together. I need therapy. Real therapy. Not just the occasional session when things get bad. I need to figure out why I keep sabotaging myself and hurting people I love. Where will you go? Nina asked, concern breaking through her hurt. I have a friend in Seattle who's been offering me her spare room. And there's a group therapy program there that specializes in attachment issues and relationship patterns. I've been researching it for a while, but never took the step. Now I need to. The conversation stretched into the early hours of the morning. They talked about family dynamics, about the ways Nina and Lily's upbringing had shaped their different approaches to love and security. They discussed the warning signs Evan and Nina had missed in their marriage, the slow drift apart that neither had addressed until crisis forced their hand. I don't hate you, Nina said to Lily, at one point surprising both her sister and her husband. I'm hurt by what happened, but I don't hate you. You're my sister, and I love you enough to want you to heal and be happy. Just not here, not right now. Lily nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I don't deserve your grace. Maybe not, Nina agreed, but I'm giving it anyway, because holding on to anger will only hurt me more.
That doesn't mean we're okay immediately. It means I'm choosing to believe we can be okay eventually. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the three of them sat in exhausted silence. The hardest truths had been spoken. The deepest wounds had been exposed. And while healing wouldn't be quick or easy, at least now, it could begin.
Choosing tomorrow. Lily left 3 days later. The morning of her departure was cloudless and bright, almost mockingly cheerful given the weight of the goodbye. Her bags were packed and waiting by the door, her plane ticket to Seattle confirmed on her phone. Nina had taken the day off work, determined to see her sister off properly, despite everything that had happened. The two sisters stood in the driveway, while Evan loaded Lily's bags into the car that would take her to the airport. There was so much to say, and simultaneously nothing that hadn't already been said. Nina pulled Lily into a tight embrace, holding her younger sister the way she had when they were children and Lily had scraped her knee or lost a toy. "Call me when you get there," Nina said, her voice thick with emotion. "And call me when you start therapy. I want to know you're okay." "I will," Lily promised. "And Nina, thank you for not shutting me out completely, for being better than I deserved." "We're family," Nina said simply. "That doesn't mean what happened was okay, but it means I'm not giving up on you." Lily turned to Evan, and the moment was awkward and painful in its honesty. "Take care of her," she said. "Take care of each other. What you have is rare, and I'm sorry I almost ruined it." "Take care of yourself," Evan replied. "Really, take care of yourself. Not for us, but for you." As the car pulled away, Nina leaned into Evan's side, and they watched until it disappeared around the corner. The house felt different when they walked back inside, emptier, but also lighter. The tension that had permeated every room was finally gone, leaving them space to breathe and rebuild. The following weeks were not easy. Evan and Nina started couples counseling, sitting in a small office with a kind-faced therapist who asked difficult questions and didn't let them hide behind comfortable platitudes. They talked about their individual needs, about how their communication had broken down, about the ways they'd stopped prioritizing their relationship. "You've both been living parallel lives instead of a shared life," the therapist observed during one session. "You were in the same house, the same bed, but emotionally you drifted into separate orbits." It was true. In the safety of the therapy room, they admitted things they'd never said out loud. Nina confessed that she'd been afraid Evan would find her boring compared to the exciting life he'd left behind when they settled down. Evan admitted he'd felt more like a support system than a partner, someone whose own dreams and desires had become secondary to Nina's career. "But I never asked you to do that," Nina said, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted you to diminish yourself for me." "I know. I did it to myself. I convinced myself that being supportive meant being invisible." Slowly, painfully, they began to rebuild. They instituted date nights, no phones allowed, where they actually talked about more than logistics and schedules. Evan started playing piano again, filling the house with music that Nina would stop to listen to, remembering why she'd fallen in love with this man who could translate emotion into melody. Nina cut back her hours at the lab, realizing that her perfect research project meant nothing if her marriage fell apart. They also made time for physical intimacy, rediscovering each other's bodies with a new appreciation. The first time they made love after everything that had happened, it was tentative and emotional, both of them crying and laughing and holding each other like they were afraid to let go. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, more real than anything had been in months. "I see you again," Nina whispered in the darkness afterwards. "I forgot what it felt like to really see you and let you see me." Lily called every week from Seattle, her voice growing stronger and more grounded with each conversation. Therapy was hard, she reported, forcing her to confront patterns she'd carried since childhood. The group sessions were particularly challenging, hearing her own behaviors reflected in other stories, recognizing the damage she'd done not just to Nina and Evan, but to countless people throughout her life. "I'm learning that I've been chasing intensity instead of intimacy," she told Nina during one call. "I mistook drama for passion,
forbidden for desirable. I never gave myself a chance to build something real because I was always looking for the rush of something impossible. That's a big realization, Nina said, proud despite everything. I think I need to be alone for a while, really alone, not just between relationships. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by who wants me or who I want. 3 months after Lily left, Nina and Evan took a weekend trip to the coast, returning to the cabin where they'd spent their first anniversary. This time, things were different. They hiked along the cliffs, talking about their dreams and fears. They cooked meals together in the tiny kitchen, bumping into each other and laughing. They stayed up late by the fire, not because they were avoiding bed, but because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. "Do you think about her?" Nina asked one night, the question not coming from insecurity but from curiosity. "Sometimes," Evan admitted honestly. "Not in the way I did when she was here, but I think about what happened and what it taught me. Mostly I think about how close I came to destroying this because I was too proud or too scared to tell you I was unhappy. I think about it too, about how I almost lost you because I took you for granted. But I also think we're stronger now, not despite what happened, but because of it, because we chose to face it instead of running away." 6 months later, Lily came back for a brief visit. She looked different, calmer, more centered, her eyes clearer than they'd been in years. The weekend was careful but warm, all three of them navigating new boundaries with respect and honesty. Lily shared about her progress in therapy, about the patterns she was breaking and the healthier relationships she was building. On her last evening there, as the three of them sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Lily spoke what they were all thinking. "I won't pretend what happened was good, but I'm grateful for what came out of it. You two found your way back to each other, and I finally found my way to myself." "Life is complicated," Nina said, reaching for Evan's hand. "People are complicated, but I think we're all doing the best we can." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Evan reflected on everything they'd been through. The attraction, the temptation, the pain, and finally the healing. He learned that love wasn't just a feeling, but a series of choices made every single day. The choice to be honest, even when it's hard. The choice to stay, even when leaving seems easier. The choice to see your partner, truly see them, even when routine threatens to make them invisible. He squeezed Nina's hand, feeling her squeeze back, and knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but with the kind of commitment that comes from having survived the fire and chosen each other anyway. In the end, hearts had collided and nearly shattered. But from the pieces, something stronger had been built, not despite the cracks, but incorporating them into a new design. A design that acknowledged that love requires more than passion, more than compatibility, even more than devotion. It requires the courage to be vulnerable, the wisdom to be honest, and the strength to choose the same person over and over again, especially when that choice is hard. And as the three of them sat together under the emerging stars, each on their own journey, but connected by shared history and hard-won understanding, they knew that this complicated chapter had taught them the most important lesson of all, that love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, doing the work, and choosing each other tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow.